My story with the Honda ATV goes back to 30 years ago. I was 18 months old when my parents would wrap me in blankets and lay me down on the fuel tank of my father's old 200 ATC. We would head out to the wood every weekend during the wintertime in the local ATV club here. I can't remember those early days, but it was like that for all of my childhood during the 90s. Here in St. Quentin, it's a small community here, pretty isolated from any major city. During the wintertime especially, there wasn't much to do unless you play hockey or any sports, but I wasn't really into any kind of sports. So my dad only had an ATC. When I was born, traded the ATC for 2 ATVs, so he would have one carrying me and my mom would have the other one carrying a sister. I mean, everybody would follow. My grandfather had one, my uncle had one. Over the years, when he bought this first 350, we would take that machine out for riding every weekend, plow the driveway at home with it, and he kept that bike until 2011. You turn the key, you get on it, and it's very little maintenance needed. There were no rubber engine mount back then. It was all metal on metal, so you could feel the vibration, and you can actually feel the engine torque inside of it. Maybe a suspension wasn't the greatest back then, but the old Trax, not the fastest, not the most powerful, but you just get a feeling that you wouldn't get on other bikes. So that Trax 350 really left a mark. I started a job at the grocery store. I was 16 years old. When I had enough money, I went to my dad and I asked him if he would sell me the 350. Trax. He said, you got a job now, you make enough money, you're gonna take that bike out to ride every weekend of the year. He said, go ahead and buy a brand new bike. And that kind of took me by surprise back then. I started looking out on the internet what model Honda made at the time, because obviously it was gonna be a Honda, no questioning there. The Rincon was labeled as a trail bike back then, so the only one available with the independent suspension, that was it for me. I wasn't looking for a crazy horsepower machine, or I just wanted something to get out there and ride. I bought my Rincon back in 2009. It was pretty much the same time I got my driver's license, and owning a car was none of my priorities back then, because I had my bike and I was able to do pretty much everything there was to do here in town. You could do it on an ATV. Plus you could head out to the woods, which you could not with a car. That was my everyday travel machine. I would use it to go to work after school during the weekend, and every time I had a chance, there was a new place to go and explore and find where the trail would lead me. On the first year I got the bike, I probably a little bit more than 10,000 kilometers on it. That was about the same time my friend Jean-Guy came in the story, probably close to 60 years old at the time, but he had a similar passion to riding as I did, and also he drove a logging truck in the 70s, so he knew all the logging roads. So every Saturday we would meet up at the restaurant for breakfast at 7 a.m., the bike's fully loaded, and we would head out to the woods and sometimes come back at midnight, 1 a.m., done 300-400 kilometers every weekend. And it was like that for 6-7 years. Every Saturday, it was the Saturday ride. The mileage kept climbing up. I averaged 10,000 kilometers a year for the first 10 years. So obviously, as the mileage was climbing up, things were wearing out. I needed the bike to be working every Saturday, not to miss a ride. So every now and then I would get the ATV in the shed, lift it up, and check to make sure everything was tight under it to be ready for the next ride. But the Rincon sure held up as good as the old Ford Trax I grew up on. It was a turnkey and ready-to-go machine. Very little maintenance was needed. I think the first repair I did on the ATV was at 8,000 kilometers, was a wheel bearing. And the first, if I would say, major repairs was the suspension bushing, and it was over 20,000 kilometers. That bike required extremely little maintenance other than oil change and cleaning out the air filters. That would lift me a lot more time to ride, maybe other bikes. So starting back in 2009 when I got the bike, every reason was good to go out and ride. There was always somebody ready to ride somewhere, go try a new trail or explore a new place. But the mileage kept climbing at 10,000 kilometers the first year, and after 10 years, I reached 100,000 kilometers. And I remember along the way, people were asking me, when are you gonna trade a bike? Where do you want to get your mileage at? The only answer I could give him is when I'm gonna stop riding, because the machine's there, it's ready. I've done some repairs to it. It was always worth it. The bike's 15 years old and it's still an amazing bike to me. So why would I change to something else? It's done the job great and it's still doing it. The way you're seated on the suspension, the handling, the weight of the bike also, it's a pretty lightweight for the engine size. It makes a different ride compared to some of the bigger ATVs out there. Maybe not as smooth, but you get a sense of connection. You get a good reaction of the machine on the terrain. You get good feedback. You want to ride more aggressively, you know where you're at every moment. There's no sense of disconnection. So when you're riding over 300 kilometers on a single day, it can be hard on your back. One of the upgrades I did on the Rincon was putting on Elka stage 4 shocks, and that really turned a good trail machine in a trail eating machine, if I could say. The suspension geometry is pretty great on a Rincon for a bike, considering dating back to the early 2000s. It really makes the steering easy. EPS is not available on the Rincon, but I don't think it's a necessity to have it. Sure, it might be good to have as an option for certain conditions. Let's say put Trax on the bike, working, got it heavily loaded on the front rack, it's gonna make steering harder, but for normal use as a trail bike, the steering is easy enough not to have it. So over the years, I've tried other bikes, bigger ones, and those really needed power steering. So when I got off of them and back on the Rincon, it felt almost like it had power steering. So people will ask me over the years why I bought a Honda instead of other brands, more impressive specs compared to the Rincon, but it's the detail, how everything's put together and works as it should. Quality of the component, more power is fun, but more power will wear things out faster. So that lightweight, well-built machine, it's a Honda, gonna do the job. That's how you make an ATV last 100,000 kilometers. When you got that passion about riding, you want a machine that's ready to get there and get you back home. That's another part of it. So I've seen breakdowns on the trails over the years. Unfortunately, I was rarely one of them. So that's one thing I appreciate about a Honda is the trust you can have in the machine, that it's gonna get you there and back. Trax TV, they kind of surprised me by having Honda make the new Rubicon 700 available for me to try out on the trails here, having a comparison made with my old Rincon. I had the chance to ride both and compare. I was glad to see that Honda kept what was good of the Rincon. Driving it, you still get that connection feeling on the bike, feedback from the terrain, easy handling, the suspension, the balance of the bike, it kind of helped me understand why maybe APS was not available. I still don't see it as a necessity, even though it would be nice to have it as an option. 90% of the time, you won't need it. The Rubicon or the Rincon were trail bikes. They were not necessarily meant to work, and even if you're riding it aggressively, you get a good feedback from the steering. But there might be sometimes, when you're deep rut or something, that APS might save you some hard kicks from the steering. You get used to it. You can live without. Now the drivetrain, what they improved is it's the same 3-speed transmission, but they've tuned it differently, and they've really fixed some of the glitches there was with my previous Rincon model. You would get to a point when in automatic where you would need a quick downshift, then upshift, and the transmission would just either downshift and stays there for too long before realizing you need to upshift. It didn't happen to me when I tried the Rubicon 700. The initial engagement of the transmission when you take off is smoother. The shift change is smoother. As far as power goes, does seem to have more power on the top end. So one of the other changes they did to the Rubicon is a new meter, which is, I think, better lit up than the previous one. They changed the angle. I was a bit suspicious about it because it's more angled toward the sky, worrying about the reflection. But as I was riding it, I realized that gets you a better view whether you're riding the bike sitting down or standing up. Plus, that new meter is now showing the RPMs, engine temperature, and battery voltage, which were not shown in the older Rincons. So that's all useful information when you're riding. Worry about something, you'll know whether it's working or not. The most noticeable one, of course, is that top headlight. It's pretty bright and it works amazing in combination with those warmer lower lights. Of course, that additional storage up front, the new plastics. Somehow, when you're riding the bike, it almost feels like it's smaller than the older Rincon. It almost looks like you're riding a Rancher. So for anyone considering buying a new bike, I mean, that Rubicon 700 you can purchase without any worries. Having seen what I saw on my Rincon, it's well built, it's well put together, and the quality of the component, it's gonna be a lasting machine if you take care of it and use it properly. That's an ATV that's gonna last many, many thousand miles. Having done 126,000 kilometers on my Rincon, not easy kilometers, and with the little maintenance I had to do on it, I don't see why that new Rubicon would be anything less than that. If anyone would ask me if I had any worries, I'd have to say no, because I got to prove that it's going to be a reliable bike. It's going to do what it's supposed to do, and it's going to do it for a long time. It's gonna be a great bike for anyone who likes to do a lot of mileage.